Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping families better love God and use tech. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and I'm excited for today's conversation because we are continuing this Season 3 conversation of reestablishing tech boundaries and kind of tech norms in this new normal that we are experiencing at the end of 2020 as we are drawing close to the end of the year. And we realize this is going to at least last until the beginning of 2021. So what do we do about it? Today's conversation is actually going to be about how do we reestablish fun. We have so many families and personal experiences from our own life and friends and people who are contacting us through social media who are saying, hey, this is all great. We understand we need boundaries and we need rules and we need a family tech framework. That's great. But how do we do more than just focus on the rules? And so we're going to talk about that today. And we're actually going to go really, really focused. And today's fun is going to be focused around what I like to call analog adventures, and specifically the analog adventure, the real world fun of board games. They are not the games you and I probably grew up with. They are amazing. They're beautiful. They're creative. They are engaging. They're social. There's a huge range of age and experience that young people can engage in. And they are a wonderful fit for young people who are looking for that outlet, still want to be connected with people, still want to have fun, for families to be able to engage together around the same activity without the hyperstimulation and some of the programming of video games and social media and shows and stuff that we're watching, where we can be more in control of the fun we're having and be engaged in it. And it can actually build the passions and interests and gifts that God's given us. So that's going to be today's entire conversation. I'll cover some practical stuff like what games. I'll cover some of the conversation about how to even pick these if we run off on our own and we don't like the list I give. That's great. There's amazing options out there. We'll talk about it today. So with that, let's get this conversation started. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. All right, everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about board games, and before we do, I just want to do a little housekeeping. First, thank you to everyone who's rating and reviewing this podcast. It's amazing, just so you know what's happening there. When you rate and review, that makes it so when you go to Google or if you go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and you were to type in Christian technology or parenting technology or technology addiction, any of that stuff, we are more likely to pop up. And that is what's happening. People are finding this resource thanks to you. If you have any questions, you can reach out. We have a new handle now on social media. So it's at LoveGodUseTech on either Facebook or Instagram. You can find us, send us a direct message. We love responding to you, hearing your questions, hearing what's working in your family, and just kind of processing the real life application of the gospel in our tech lives. So please do reach out to us that way, or you can just email nathan@flintandiron.org. So thank you all for that. As you heard already, today we are talking about analog adventures, board games. And I understand board games, some of us start to get cold sweats because we think of Monopoly and that one time we played our sibling and they crushed our souls and took all of our property against our will and we now no longer speak to them. I understand that's a thing. I just want to encourage you in this. Board games have changed. They are amazing. The cool part is they were made by people that basically had high trauma from lame board games. If you love Monopoly, no offense intended. It's just a little rough around the edges sometimes. But the new batch of games in the last 20 years are really fun. And we're going to basically look at 4 age groups. We're going to look at games for kids under 5, games for 6 to 9-year-olds, 10 to 12-year-olds, 13 plus. Okay. The reason we're addressing this is because we are getting a lot of screen time. The Wall Street Journal published right at the beginning of November an article talking about how we are averaging a combined total of 19 hours a day of screen time, right? We are on our screens for meetings and checking our screens when we're bored out of our minds. And then we update our lives via screens and we connect with our friends on screens. And when we're all done, we do our shopping on screens and we get some exercise, which if you're like me, often involves a screen. I'm doing a trainer inside on a bike, right? I have to be looking at a screen to figure things out for what I'm doing. Or my wife Anna does exercise videos online using a screen. And then when we're all done and the kids are in bed, we might escape with like a game or a movie or a show, right? Like 19 hours a day. The only thing we're not doing on a screen right now is sleep. And they'll probably figure that out at some point. So what do we do? And this is where that term analog adventure comes in. What do I mean? I simply mean it's an adventure that happens at the pace of real life without artificial rewards programmed in. So there's no flashing lights. There's no buttons to mash. There's no algorithms to adjust to your behavior. And there's no micro-targeting of further information where they're figuring out who you are as a consumer and now pummeling you with information and goods that they want you to purchase. And it's still fun and it allows interaction. So that's really what we're going to be talking about. The reason I love board games specifically and the reason that's today's conversation is they often revolve around the gifts, talents, and passions God has given an individual. So my boys like different games and they like them for different reasons. And when they like the same game, they like them for different reasons. And I really love that because now the individual gets to be the focus of the excitement. I get to be excited about my kids and what's unique in them and what they're loving in this game, not about the game. And just take that into an example. I had a father come up in the last week and say, hey, what age should I let my son play X video game? And video game's not the point, so I'm not going to name it. But he just said, what should the age be? And I just kind of asked some clarifying questions and gave some challenge on that of just, hey, wait as long as you can. Because here's the deal. When you play that game with your son, you're going to have fun. Your son will have fun. But your shared experience is going to be about the programmed excitement that comes out of this game you played together. It happened at a really fast pace. There were rewards directly built in, and all your enthusiasm is going to the accomplishment and the good feeling delivered by this game. You were consuming together. Whereas with a board game, it's really hard to play by yourself. The game does nothing to scintillate you, right? It's driven by you and your creative process. And there is more of this co-experience with that, right? It's happening slow. The rewards are hard to come by. And when you have it, you have a shared experience because you were both fully present in the moment. Now, are there games that are unhealthy? Yes. Let's just get that out up front, right? There's plenty of research, especially if you're going into like gambling games. There's lots of research that would encourage you to not do that with young people. But today, we're looking just at board games in general. I do wish there was another word because it drums up bad images. But that's what we're talking about with analog adventures, real time, allow the amazing gifts God's given us to be the focus and really extend from that. So with that in mind, let's jump on in. Just know that with the games that I'm going to list through, these are games that I either have played with my kids or I would let them play. If you're wondering, man, is that a good game for me? Or you go off to do your own research, a family tech framework, it would really help with that because your family tech framework will have in it your expectations for content. What do we engage? What do we consume? What's acceptable for us to find joy in and what's too far for fun? That's what a family tech framework is about. That's one of the 5 major areas that we break into. So if you already have a family tech framework, that's awesome. Your family's set. If you don't, you can check out the Gospel Tech online workshop, which is just gospeltechworkshop.com would be a way to check that out. And that will actually help you make a family tech framework. So the content we're doing today, when talking board games, I've curated a list. I was going to go like, I'll do 2 to 3 games for each of these brackets. And then I got into it and I was like, there's so many amazing games. So I'm going to give you about 4. I'll walk you through. We'll actually talk specific kind of brass tacks games, and we'll talk about why do these matter? How does this help us? All right. Okay. So with that in mind, here we go. Also show notes. I do want to say this. Show notes, I'll give you a resource for where you could research your own games. If you kind of like the idea, but you want to do more, boardgamegeek.com is a great spot to go. So links in the notes. All right. So if you have kids under 5, so I've got 2 right now. Henry's just about to turn 5. So right in that range, you can always go with kind of the classic shoots and ladders, right? You can go with the Candyland shoots and ladders, Trouble, Sorry, Memory, like just basic games that have been around for 70 plus years, way before the idea of behavioral design was, well, 1, officially established by science, and 2, before it was commonplace in most things we consume. App games, big time video games, social media, right? That stuff is just hardwired in there. That was not the case. So you can just go old school games, and those are fine and fun. I personally like to bring in some others. So here's some suggestions. If you've got a kiddo under 5, Zingo. Zingo, basically you have a little card, and sometimes they have like math Zingo and they have spelling Zingo. So there's different versions, but ours is there's a bunch of words, right? They're basically just sight words. So sight word Zingo. And these are words that are kind of tricky to learn and sound out, but they're just words kids need to know, like and the. And so you basically get 2 cards at a time and they come out. You have this little slider thing and it punches out 2 cards. And the kids will have to look at their card and match it, just sight word match the word that they need, take it and put it on their card, right? They love just the kind of competitive nature of it. My 4-year-old learned sight words really quick that his older brother didn't learn until the end of kindergarten. And so there was some benefit educationally, but they really like it. It can be played in 10 to 15 minutes, and you get this kind of shared experience together, and they love to actually just play it themselves now. So I really like Zingo. For younger kids, if you've got, it can be hard to find games for kids like under 4. Hi-Ho Cherry-O and Hoot Owl Hoot are 2 options. They're both super simplistic. Basically, you spin a like little arrow and get to do whatever the arrow tells you to do. There's a bunch of games kind of in that genre, but these are really sweet games. The Hi-Ho Cherry-O, you have different fruits that you add. Hoot Owl Hoot, you basically are working together to get the owl into their nest before sunrise, and so you're working kind of against the timer there. What I love about these games, especially Hoot Owl Hoot, is that you are working cooperatively. So you get this kind of idea of we take turns, but we're still on the same team. Not everything's about like we're going to win over the bodies of other. It's not a small pie mindset there. I do like that. Like there are things that everyone can win at, right? Like that is a real thing. Like in the business world, one business doing better actually can help your business do better. Like that's even a real world. It's not always we have to cannibalize and eat those around us in order to survive. There are times where there's just one winner. That's a real thing too. Coming from a wrestling background, both as a coach and a wrestler, I understand that sometimes it's 1v1 and one person wins and the other loses. But we do like to show our kids as well that cooperation can go a long way, especially when we talk gospel mindset. It's not really our victory to win all the time, right? Like there are times where we simply are helping others. We're planting the seeds. Right? Like I do like that. So not everything has to be combat and total world domination, although those games are fun. So when we're talking under 5, those are good games, right? You can go to boardgamegeek.com and you can actually look up family games and they'll give you a list. Some of these games were listed 800 out of their list, and some of them were listed in the top 100 or 50. I think one of the games I have not played, but I can say through friends, right? I guess I try to play most games before I suggest them, but Outfoxed would be an example from that family list where you gather clues and you help catch the fox before it leaves town, right? That would be another cool idea of a cooperative game where you're engaging your kids in a story, they're working to solve a puzzle, it's got a finite amount of time, it's going to take you 15 or so minutes, you can get done. So if you got a kid under 5 and you're trying to find a way, I'm not just saying, hey, rip all video games away from them and play this game all the time. I'm saying, how can you get one win a week with something that operates at the pace of real life? Because most kids, when they hear board games, are going to cringe, right? They're going to picture sitting in a room with crickets in the background with their parents bored to tears, especially if you got a middle school kid. So we're looking for those little wins. Start those little wins young, and we're getting that idea of like, hey, did you notice we just had fun and we didn't have to go do something extravagant and expensive, right? We didn't have to do anything that was really high intensity. Like we sat here and we had fun and it was for 15 minutes and we got a win. So this would be one way to do that at a young age. But let's say hypothetically your kid's not at a young age. You're now dealing with that 6 to 9-year-old range. Well, with our 6 to 9-year-olds, this is where our games get a little more intense. So some of the benefit of board games, we have things like focus, we have spatial reasoning, we have cooperative play, where they're actually having to follow a set of rules but still play well with others. There's a lot of bonuses. You can actually just go Google benefits of board games, or go to your local library or get a JSTOR research library account. That's great. All those are awesome. You will find that board games actually do have some really neat benefits to them. So in the 6 to 9 age range, we get to kind of step out of that just we're learning how to make eye contact and take turns kind of thing to games like Quirkle. So Quirkle is basically Scrabble, but with shapes and colors. There's 6 different shapes, there's 6 different colors, and basically players are trying to work through how to get either all of one color in a row. So I need 6 different shapes, all one color, or 6 of the same shape, right, of all different colors. So you switch them. And when you get those, you get a quirkle, right? And that's how you get your points. So if you get 2 blocks together, I just got 2 points. If I can get all 6, I get 12 points. And that's what a quirkle does. So that's the kind of the Scrabble aspect. And what's neat about this is it's awesome for kids who can't read yet because they understand colors and they understand shapes, and they will catch on, at least at that basic elementary level, of putting them in rows and taking turns, and you can only lay in one direction, right? And that there are there's just a couple other rules on that, but that's pretty simple. And so my 5 and 7-year-old boys play that with us, right? Like that's something they enjoy to do, and I think it's neat because they get their minds wrapped around it. They get that feeling of success for doing something hard, but that reward comes slow. They had to work at it. Like, you're not getting a quirkle every round. You might only get 2 or 3, if you get any at all. And so even scoring high points, like, it's helping moderate that reward. It's not just consumption. You are making the experience. And I love that about things like Quirkle. I think on the flip side, so I have one child who is very much kind of spatial reasoning, shapes, colors. That's his jam. The other is Carcassonne is his kind of thing, where it's basically a cooperative puzzle. Carcassonne is a region in France, and basically this puzzle is beautiful French countryside, and there's monasteries and roads and little towns and pasture land, basically, is what you've got. So you flip one tile, and you as a group decide where to put it, and then the individual who lays it scores points off that tile. And it's a really neat kind of cooperative way to play. There's still a winner, so you're going to get to the end and have someone who has the most points, but you do it in a everyone working together kind of way. So like there are moves that can help multiple people, and there's no alliances or anything like really formal in that, but it is a neat game, and it's a totally different play style than Quirkle because it is the opposite of straight lines and exact shapes and kind of mathematical equations. It's much more picture and narrative, and it's very fun in that way. So Carcassonne, if you've got a kid who isn't a Quirkle person, kind of a mix between those two, I guess. Or I'll just go on. Third game, Blockus is like 4-player Tetris. What I love Blockus for in the 6 to 9 age range is one of the best things about board games and generally games in life more broadly, is that games teach adversity in a very safe way. It's very honed, right? Blockus, the entire point of the game is to block other players from laying down their pieces. Now, the beauty of this is, in most of life, we tell people, take turns, don't block people from doing things. If it bothers someone, you need to stop. But the cool part about games and about sports is everyone signed up for this, right? You played Blockus because the game is called Blockus, right? That's what it's about. So when I lay down a piece and then someone else lays down a piece so I can't take that next awesome turn that was going to put me in the lead, I get frustrated. How do I mitigate that, right? Do I just run away? Do I pretend like it didn't happen? Do I freak out? Do I lay on the ground on a ball? Like, all those are real options. So then how do we handle that? And what does God say about handling adversity and not sinning in our anger? It doesn't say you'll never be angry, but what does anger look like in a righteous life? And how do we help our kids to process that around their peers in a competitive environment? So I love it. I'll compare it to wrestling. Wrestled in high school, junior high school, and then coached it for a number of years, 6-7 years when I was teaching. And what I love about wrestling is everyone agreed to the rules. Like, you're literally going to go into a ring with one other person and you're going to force them to do something they don't want to do, which is lay on their back for 3 seconds. That's the point of the game, right? They can quit anytime they want, but they showed up to follow the same rules you did. Now, you're not going to cheat. You're not going to hurt them, but you are going to get them using the rules you've got to do something against their own will, right? That's how you score points in wrestling, is directly against the will of your opponent. And I think there is something important to that, to recognizing like there's games and it's going to happen to you and you're going to get frustrated. And so what do we do in light of that frustration? How do we find a way to calm ourselves? How do we gain the space and the mindset to do it? How do we determine if the amount of work it takes to be good at that is worth the outcome that we know is potentially there, right? We might lose. How do we deal with that? We need to help our kids learn how to win well and lose well, because that is, I mean, effectively what like the rest of the relationships in their life are, right? If you don't know how to win well and lose well, marriage is going to be rough because you're going to handle the good days poorly, and you're going to handle the bad days worse. And so I believe the gospel is all about helping us learn how to win and lose well and really choose to lose, at least when it comes to those around us, and to lose for the sake of the gospel, right? So that we can win in the big picture, because we understand the victory is not ours. So I think there is a lot in games there. And Blockus is beautifully simple, can be played by a huge age range, and you don't have to tell your kids that's what you're doing, but I just wanted to put a footnote there. I think that exemplifies what's present in a lot of different games. The final game for this age group is called Ticket to Ride. Basically, you collect multicolored tickets, and the first person to travel the most high-value tracks of this train track board wins, right? I played it with kids as young as 4. I've played it with my nieces and nephews who are in their mid and upper teens, and I've played it with adults. And I will say the adult games can get cutthroat, right? Like people start taking tracks from people and cutting people off. Like it is one of those games that gets more exciting the older kids get. And I think, again, the point of Ticket to Ride is it's a beautifully done game, it's well thought out, and it provides players from a wide range of age to kind of recognize the adventure in it, right? It's fun. It's fun to look at. It's fun to hold. It's fun to participate in. And it's fun to kind of get a family win on that. So Ticket to Ride's another great age for 6 to 9-year-olds. And as we extend from that here, we start to see that the games can involve more words, right? So now we're going to look at that 10 to 12-year-old range. And when you look at games for 10 to 12-year-olds, what you need to remember is that 10 to 12-year-olds are amazing. They're super smart and they want adventure, right? They don't want to feel like you hid Brussels sprouts in the brownies, right? Like they don't want to feel like you're trying to sneak education into what they're doing. And I think that this is sometimes we get too cutesy with this. I remember growing up, like Christian video games were a thing. And so you could go, in our town, it was Dove Book and Bible. You can go to the Christian bookstore and you could pick up a Christian video game. And it was like, oh, the fruit of the spirit. And they're all like these weapons that you use to defeat the lies of the enemy. And like, it was wildly cheesy. It's fun. I enjoyed the games, but like they were just really, really over the top on like the trying to Jesus you while playing a video game thing. Whereas like I just wanted to play a video game. Like that's why I was there. So it's okay for our 10 to 12-year-olds to just let these kids show up and play a game. Let them have fun. Let them enjoy the process, because really, like, God made their brains. God made their ability for language. God made their creative aspects. Like, yes, we have to help them hone those things. Like, there are some negative outputs for that. But just because our kid wants to enjoy that, like the most exciting things we can do in life are the things where we are most appreciating God in that, right? A hike is at its best when God is most glorified through that hike. We're recognizing the nature, we're breathing the air, we're seeing the trees, we're experiencing the enjoyment of the endorphins we're getting from exercise and the people that we're with, right? Like that's the best hike ever, right? It's not necessarily even the scenery, but the scenery can give God glory in that as well. And the same, I think, is true with games. The best games are the games that are going to allow your kid to recognize, man, I've been wired. It's something about me like clicks with this, right? And it's not that this thing is programmed to trigger my brain in a certain way. It's not the rate of stimulation or the insane pops of colors and 5K, over simulating visuals that I've got going on. It's that my brain clicks with this, or that I loved that challenge, or I felt that reward, right? And I got to experience some microcosm of adventure, and I got to do it with people who care about me and are present. So a game that would be an example, that would be Mad Gab. So I gave you that whole tangent there just to say it's okay if your kid just likes a game because it's a game. Don't think overly deeply about like what Bible verse does this game tie into. There are games you should axe based on your family framework, because your family will have expectations for content in the 4 areas of Drool Tech, right? So social media, games, shows, music, all of those need to have expectations for your family. If you do not have a family framework, go to gospeltechworkshop.com and check out what we've created as a tool to do that. But basically, you're going to need the family framework. Basically walks you through 5 areas to create. So that's like safety, time, place, right? So where are we going to be using our tech, when, how, for how long, what happens if it goes wrong, that kind of stuff needs to be, expectations need to be set as a family for your family. So I'm not saying don't have any limits on the board games you play. I'm saying it's okay if it's just a game. All right, with that in mind. The first game for 10 to 12-year-olds. It's called Mad Gab. Basically, it's a word game with crazy phrases that are nonsensical. And I think there's a Canadian version of it called Babylon. And you basically, a team player, so there's 2 teams. Team one's player will stand up and read this, and team one tries to guess what that person's saying. As many as you can get through in a minute. Team two can guess ones that they miss, right? And they're just nonsensical words on a page, and you have to read through them. And the faster you read them, they will sound like different phrases. And so that's a fun game. It's very silly. And I like the bonus of it does have this like upfront presentation, like charades thing going on. Not really charades because you're saying the words, but you get the idea. It has an upfront presentation piece, which again, it's not broccoli and the brownies. It is actually them doing something they want to do, and they're getting experience with eyes on them. It is something we don't get a lot of in the age of screens. We are much happier playing our games on screens in a group because then we just look at the screens. We don't look at each other, and no one gives us the attention. And those are still real world skills. We still want to know, how do we communicate in person and accept the eye focus of the people around us and give eye focus? So Mad Gab's a good one on that. Quest for El Dorado is a fun one where basically the map always changes. There's strategy cards and there's opportunities to be competitive if you want to be. So that 10 to 12 age range kind of picks it up, but thematically it's relatively safe, which I like. The new Monopoly for the modern age is called Settlers of Catan, Catan. Basically, it's cooperative card sharing. So you're trying to win first to 10 points, but you can only get there by trading resources with your neighbors and 10 to 12-year-olds, right? As we are ramping up into our hormonal ages here, this idea of cooperative competition is fantastic, right? So, we're working together. It's like, we're still buddies, but I need, 3 sheep for that stone, or you're not going to be able to do that, right? Like, and there's this barter system that comes into it. And spoiler alert, the first person to 8 out of 10 points usually never wins because everyone quits trading with that person. So just more opportunities to deal with adversity, people. All right, I'm going to go, I'll kind of mash these next ones together. So you have a game called Dixit, Dixit, where basically it is like this: get into your imagination and make this like silly explanation for these beautifully watercolored hand-drawn art cards. And basically it's like apples to apples in that there's a leader. I haven't described apples to apples yet. Sorry, that's the next game. There's a leader. That person puts a one word or one sentence phrase description like dreams in the clouds, and then lays a card. Everyone else lays cards. You mix them up, you lay them out, and people have to try to guess which one it was. Your job, get one person to guess at least, but not everyone. And that's kind of the fun of it. It's how do you play with words? How do you play with imagination? How do you communicate clearly to groups intentionally? Where apples to apples is similar. A lead player is going to choose an adjective card like funny, scary, respectable. And then the players all try to match with their noun cards something they believe is funny, scary, respectable, that the judge will pick, because the judge will pick one card. Both of those then are building, again, cooperative play, still some competitive nature. It can be wildly funny. With Apples to Apples, I would actually go with the junior version. Apples to Apples Junior has some safer options for the nouns and adjectives. The red box, so that's a green box. The red box, regular Apples to Apples, is awesome. But I have worked with this with middle schoolers, and they will make things inappropriate if they can. And it's much easier to do with red box Apples to Apples. So I would I would say with this, we're talking 10 to 12-year-olds here. So I would say probably go green box for them. Any older than that, red box is fine, and just work through it. The final one for this one, and I know this is a ton of games for the 10 to 12, but I just wanted that. I want families to try this one. If you have young boys, especially, I have found it works with boys and girls, but this is one of those unique games that kind of late elementary, early middle school group loves. It's called Super Fight. And imagine if you basically had the ultimate battle arena of all time. So the History Channel used to have a program called Deadliest Warrior, where they would pit different fighters against each other, and they'd ask who would win, right? So you'd have a samurai fighting a Viking, and then they would run all these statistics on the armor and the weapons and all this information, and they'd try to determine who would win in a fight, right? That's kind of Super Fight, but to the most ridiculous extreme. Each player gets a hero card and an attribute. The players basically go in a circle. And so let's say I got my hero card was Chuck Norris, and the adjective, the description was on fire. So that's my hero in the Super Fight. And then the person next to me gets a polar bear with laser arms, right? And so now we have to determine. So I'm one and that person's two. Let's say there's 8 people playing. We're going to be the first fight. I get to make a description on why, or an argument for why I believe I get to win in a fight. And then my opponent will say, well, I'm a polar bear with laser arms, and here's why I would win. And then the group votes. So we don't vote, but the other 6 players would vote on which of the 2 of us would win this fight. And that's it. Now, one of us will win and progress to the next round. We go around the other 3 pairs, and then you have a semifinal and a final round. And that's the entire game of Super Fight. Again, you can hear what would happen here, right? Silly stories come up. You can allow a rebuttal. So once I hear my opponent go, yeah, but this is all I would have to do, you allow, whatever, a minute or 2 for them to argue it out, and then you take a vote. And what's awesome with it is there's never the same fight twice, right? Like it's always this idea of, well, how do I convince people that my idea is better? And it's wonderful for argument. As a former language arts teacher, I strongly recommend this game. And then we have our final group of games, though. This is our games for our 13 plus group. Our 13 plus group, if you have anyone in that age range, God bless you. They are a delight. Having taught middle school for a long time, I love 13, 14-year-olds. Those are my jam, man, where they are super honest. They have a growing grasp of sarcasm. They are often fairly dark in their humor, and they have no reason to pretend they like something if they don't like it, because their grades don't count, usually for high school by 8th grade, and they generally are, they're kind of over it by this point. So yet they're still young enough that they want to do things in groups, and they still want to be a part of things. So I do love this age group. My encouragement in this is, remember, I had said all the games are going to be under an hour long. That might break for some of these games because young people, right, they've increased their ability to focus on a task that moves at the pace of real life. They have interests now that can drive them based on their passions, their talents, their abilities. And so it's okay to give them a game that might last longer. You will very, very rarely find a game that overstimulates a young person. And I do just want to add this in there. One caveat to that. There's the two games that I have seen be the least healthy long-term, I guess 3, would be like a living card game where it's pay to win. So you have to have all the cards in order to be able to play this game well, where it operates kind of like a video game in that way. Like, oh, you have it, but you need to like put this much more time in the game until you can really get the equipment that's going to let you do that well. So you have to go buy lots of these little card packs or hunt them down. So Magic the Gathering would be an example of that, where cool idea for a game concept, poorly executed. There are better versions of that that can be done. So that would be one. Another one would be something like a Warhammer or Warhammer 40K, where you are having to buy miniatures where it's $40 for like a little set of 3 or 4 or 5 of them, or $100 for one vehicle. Like you don't just buy a box and you get the game. And that's unfortunate. Or the third one would be like a Dungeons and Dragons, where there are these expansive narratives that are amazing and it's so cool to be part of the story. And yet you go far enough, you listen to a single podcast because you're into it and you like podcasts. And so you start like diving into that world, and it can get pretty dark pretty quick. And it's very hard to monitor that because it is set up to do that. It's allowing people to kind of experience their darker sides because, hey, it's not hurting anybody. So those 3 games specifically, when we look 13 plus, I would just put asterisk next to it. If you love these games and you've got a firm handle on how to keep them healthy, it's your family. Like, please love them well and lead them in the way the Lord is asking you to do that, and show them your passion for it and how you manage that well. I would say this, I was challenged when I was into kind of Pathfinder, which is a split off of D&D. Dungeons and Dragons is what D&D is. But Pathfinder, when I was into that, a pastor challenged me on this idea of like leaving the back door open to your house and knowing that there are snakes around. I know what a snake is. I know how to spot it. I will see it when it comes in the house and I can fight it. Right? I'll know to get a pole and do that, but my kids may not. And that some of these games are kind of leaving snakes out, or at least leaving the door open for a snake, right? That there are potential troubles that can be avoided that are not necessary. So when we look at games for older kids, we go, man, my kid is super passionate about kind of mythical worlds and big imagination and extended adventures. That's great. I've got some ideas here for you that will not put a damper on any of that. They're incredible. They will help with that. And actually, I have alternatives to every one of those games I just suggested. But I just want you to be aware that as they fall into those, I have watched all three of those games have similar impacts on people's lives to actually some of the very things we dislike about social media and video games and other tech, often because of those things. You have to pay to win. It takes an insane amount of investment that isn't really even-handed. They're not really helping you get into the game. A lot of the lore, the storyline is pretty dark, which I can nerd out on some other time. And just generally, there are better alternatives. So I wanted to say that up front. All right, diving in, 13 plus. The first game I would say would be Dominion. Dominion actually operates a little bit like Magic the Gathering. You have a deck of cards. Your goal, though, is instead of destroying your opponent, it's collect treasure and build your card deck, acquire the most valuable land, right? So there are actually some like magic-y cards in there. If you're sensitive to that and you do not want those in your game box, literally, I've done this before. You just pull the games out, throw them in a Ziploc, toss it in a cabinet somewhere, and just leave the rest of the game in there. And that's fine. The kids will still enjoy the game. They're not necessary for play. But I like games like Dominion because all of the pieces come in the box. And then there's another box you could buy if you want to expand your experience, but all of the pieces come there. You're not out buying packs of cards hoping you get that piece or having to shell out whatever, $150 just to expand your squad, right? Like you can get that next thing that you want and you know what you're getting and you're paying for it. And I like that idea. I feel that's upfront and fun. So Dominion's a great one. Codenames is another good like game night game for 13 plus kids. Basically 2 teams. You can give a 1-word clue and you have to try to get your team to guess the cards that line up with that clue. If they guess wrong, they lose a turn at best, or you might just get fully eliminated. And so there's kind of the zaniness and craziness and competitiveness of that, but it's very fun. So Codenames is another great one. I had mentioned Warhammer 40K. If your young person, your 13 plus year old, is into games that involve battle, the number one game I've found that I actually own personally and let my boys play is called BattleTech. It's like a 35-year-old board game where basically you are these mechs and gigantic robots that walk around. If you've ever seen the B-grade movie Pacific Rim, it's basically that. Like, aliens have invaded the world. What should we do? Build 300-foot robots to punch them to death. Like, that's effectively what you're doing. The robots fight each other. The pilots and the robots frequently don't die. That's not the point. The point is basically you have warring nations, and when the robots are done, the fight's over, and then that's it. And then the nations like agree to move forward. So that's kind of the premise of it. I've included links in the show notes again, so you can go down there and check it out. But I do like the general idea. I like that it can capture the imagination. It has some combat action that is, I'll call it believable in that it works. It doesn't feel cheesy or like you just roll 1 dice and you win or lose. Like Risk drives me nuts for that reason, right? Like, what? My entire army got knocked out because of a 3? That shouldn't work. So this just works better. It feels more like you're actually part of it. And the goal isn't, bloodthirsty slaying of your enemies. So BattleTech is a great option. And the last one I have found young people actually get super engaged in, and it's the opposite. So I don't love when all game suggestions go towards combat because that isn't the only way to solve problems, right? So Power Grid would be like the flip side of BattleTech. Power Grid is you are a power company and you are trying to provide power to as many cities as possible. And so it starts off with bartering. You're going to buy your power stations, and then you are going to, which by the way, by that I mean like, oh, I want to get this coal station and it can, this coal plant, and it can power 2 cities. And someone goes, well, how much are you willing to pay? I'll pay 9 for it. They're like, well, I'll pay 12, right? And so like already you have this like competition for these resources where people are trying to figure out like, how much can I spend? But then I have to buy fuel. And then I actually have to go, like I have to pay for the rights to go to these cities. And like, it's awesome. It's very simple. Like Owen, my 7-year-old, can play it. But it's also intricate enough that, again, against an ever-expanding mind, as they gain more skills, they'll recognize more strategies. And so it doesn't just play itself out once and then be done. So I love, I'll add this on this. I like that it has that bartering piece and then the economics of like fuel. There's some supply and demand. And I love the cost benefit idea of certain types of energy. So nuclear power is great, but it's crazy expensive, right? Like we can see why people would start with coal, and that coal, they go, well, yeah, it's polluting, but look at how much we can do with it, right? Like it's really easy for people that don't have a lot of money to get access to electricity and to build industry around this. Like, of course, this would be a thing. And I think just that conversation, especially with our 13 plus kids, who are many of whom are very much in the conversation about how do we love the planet well, and how do we steward it well, and how do we take care of this beautiful creation God's given us, we recognize like, well, here's part of what's going into that conversation, right? Like if we say it's only this kind of tech, what if you don't have it, right? Or who gets rights to it, and how do you make that work in a crazy global world? So those are some games for our ages, right? What do? We went younger than 5 all the way through 13. I hope that's encouraging. I know I went into each specific game, and the reason I did that was to help you hear some of the logic behind it. These games are not just ways to fill your kid's time. These are ways to get wins with your kid where the experience is the outcome we're going for. Now, let's say you didn't hear any games in this conversation where you would say, yeah, that's absolutely the game my kid wants to play, or I'm looking forward to that. That sounds really exciting. I would encourage you to go to boardgamegeek.com. You can, again, go to the show notes. It'll be a link down there, boardgamegeek.com. That is not a sponsor or anything. It's just a resource that I personally use that I found very useful for families. They've upgraded their website. And the basic premise is you can go there and search by categories, and you can find games that will be interesting to you and to your gamer, and that will be a good fit for you and your family. So do your research. Go to boardgamegeek.com, check that out. And I do want to add just one more thing. So we've been talking about analog adventure. We've been talking about, all right, our family has technology. We're looking to reset our tech boundaries. We've made a family tech framework. We understand what our content expectations are and our time expectations. And we're looking for those other ways to get a win. Do something fun. Do it together. Give our kids some fun outlets. What are we going to do? And I've suggested board games as one of those. This really could, Anna was joking, but this really could be like a 4-part series. I could do this for a while, but the idea, I hope what you got out of this is there's a huge age range. There's a lot of different interests, play styles, things that focus on your kid's own gifts and interests and passions. And it's a way for you to get a win with your kid and let that relational piece be the focal point of your excitement, not the consumption, right? You're still making something out of this game, even though the game has rules and the game has pictures and the game has, some interactive boundaries. It is not playing itself. It is not directing you how to play it through suggestive, carrots and sticks of it telling you how to run your life and rewarding you or punishing you into certain behaviors. You are the one kind of driving that vehicle. So I do like that as an analog adventure. And I would add this. There is an entire format of narrative gameplay with tabletop games. Many of our kids growing up are going to come across things like Dungeons and Dragons. And many parents will come and say, well, I don't want my kid playing Dungeons and Dragons because I don't like the content, or I'm not comfortable with whatever. I had a bad experience, like whatever it is. So a game in that avenue of narrative gameplay where you're going to have someone driving the story and the other players are all part of it, I would strongly suggest Star Wars Edge of the Empire. And the reason I'm adding this as kind of an addition to Beyond the 13 plus is it's not an easy to play thing. It does require someone to do at least a little bit of groundwork to make the story or to read a pre-made story. But if you're not familiar with this kind of play at all, the basic premise is in this game, you start in the Star Wars universe. So you're a random Star Wars character, not a Jedi. The Jedi don't really exist in these games, but you're just a character. And then you get led through a story. So one person does the work to make the story or to read it. You can buy kind of pre-developed stories, and you play through it and you say what you do. And then there's dice. They're not numbered dice, but they're dice that basically give you success and failure. And if you get more successes and you got failure, then it happened. And if it didn't happen, you failed, then something else happens. You didn't just not do anything. You didn't just stand there and stare. Like the opposite of what you were trying to do just happened. And so it is a really interesting game. I have a friend who is a doctor. He works with kids with autism, and he actually uses this specific game to help them develop social scenarios. So what he said is nice is because they're dealing with a fictional scenario, he can put them in a classroom and have someone do something, and then they'll determine what they're going to do in response. And it's not them thinking about, well, what would I do? they're actually now imagining this outside individual. And for some of his patients, especially as young kids, we're talking 8 to 12-year-olds, it helps. It kind of helps them begin to at least wrap their brain around what a social emotional situation could involve and why someone might get upset at that. So he doesn't even use necessarily the Star Wars side. He uses the rule set. But I think that is true with all of our kids, that it does give us this opportunity to be a part of a story and to kind of work it out. With that in mind, I would strongly caution, some people would argue, well, this is really good because you can go into these worlds and you can do all the bad stuff you wouldn't do in real life because it gets it out of your system. False, flat out false. False on so many levels, scientific level, psychological level, like the plants that you feed grow, right? Like if you're feeding negative behaviors, that most of the research on that, by the way, is going to focus on, well, they feel a lot of shame, and that shame means that they're not going to do it next. Like, no, there's plenty of people that are doing things they hate, and they're doing those things a lot. And they're getting really good at doing those things a lot, despite the fact they hate them, right? Like they're building this behavioral norm up for themselves. So I would just say this: if your kids get into those games, challenge them on the what are you doing in the game? How does that reflect? You are an active participant in this storyline, so just make sure that what are you finding joy in? What are we doing, right? I'm not saying you can't be a silly character that goes off and does silly things, because it is a game, but we just want to be intentional that they can get out of hand. So just be aware of that. I do like it for parents and for families that come to me and say, well, my kid really wants to play Dungeons and Dragons. This is my go-to. Personally, it's so that I don't have to deal with demons and underworld and all that stuff again, because D&D has some stuff, and especially some lore, that gets kind of quirky. And I understand the arguments people will make about, well, the founder didn't believe in that stuff. That's fine. The game has morphed in 40 years, and it can get out of hand, and it can get, at least to adult, if not inappropriate for any age, it can get there in a hurry. And while I appreciate the narrative piece, Star Wars Edge of Empire gives you all of that, the fun, the adventure, the being part of kind of the Star Wars world without a lot of the troubling aspects of those other games. So there you have it. Board games are an awesome opportunity. I hope you give at least one of these a shot. I hope you go to Board Game Geek and look up something that might be a good fit for your family, and then check that out. Amazon carries games. If you have a local board game shop, go there first and just have a conversation. They'll ask you, what age group are you looking for? How many people? What are their interests? Like, they'll actually help you narrow down to kind of a genre of game. I would say this: if all you have in your area is a Wizards of the Coast or a Games Workshop, don't just walk in there and ask them what they think. Both those companies are run around, Wizards of the Coast is D&D, and Games Workshop is Warhammer 40K, and that's basically what they're going to try to schlep on you. It doesn't mean they're uninformed. It doesn't mean they're not valuable game producers. It just means they have a motive. They have a game that's driving their business model, and they're going to push that to the front. So just be aware of that if you're going and asking opinions. Like a local board game shop where it's just their job to find a good fit and have your family like that, so you want to come back, that's what we're talking about. And if you don't have that, back to Board Game Geek for you. So I hope this is helpful. I hope you are encouraged by the conversation and hearing that games can actually be awesome. I hope you made it this far in the conversation, because I love talking about board games. But my real hope is that you will see that there are analog adventures. There are things that are basically what video games were based off of. And those same creative minds that are super, super smart and good at making neat and fun things are putting that into analog games, and they're doing an awesome job with it, and we would love to support that industry in continuing to make high-quality products that can capture the imagination and the hearts of our kids and spur on the good things that God is giving them, not distract them from those things. So if you have any questions, reach out to at LoveGodUseTech on Instagram or Facebook, or nathan@flintandiron.org. If you want to email me, I would love to hear your questions, your comments, your concerns, and I really look forward to continuing this conversation as we work together to better love God and use tech.